At 5:12 a.m., Daniel Carter took Stephen Park's backpack without abgavering. Stephen's fingers were already stiff, clumsy from the cold. Daniel tightened the straps on his own shoulders and nodded once. No speeches, just a small correction before the mountain decided anything else. Mount Hood rose above them, pale and silent. Timberline lodge lights faded behind their backs. 4 men, 1 line, crampons biting into frozen snow, headlamps cutting narrow tunnels through darkness. Brian Holt set the pace. Mark Ellis checked his watch like time could be persuaded. Stephen tried to match their rhythm. Daniel closed the line, carrying extra weight and pretending it did not matter. The forecast had promised a window until early afternoon, winds increasing after 1 p.m. Summit and down before it turns, Mark had said the night before. It sounded reasonable in a warm room. By the time they reached the Hog's Back, dawn had flattened the sky into a dull gray sheet. The fumaroles near Devil's Kitchen breathed steam that disappeared instantly in the wind. The ridge narrowed. Depth became unreliable. The first strong gust hit around 8:40. Not violent, just firm enough to make each step deliberate. "Wind's building," Brian said without turning. Daniel felt it through the pack straps. The extra weight pulled him slightly backward. He adjusted and kept moving. Stephen slipped once. Daniel caught his harness before the slide became something worse. "I've got you," Daniel said. They continued. At 9:45, visibility started to thin. The horizon dissolved. Snow and sky blended into the same white surface. Mark stopped and checked the GPS. The screen flickered in the cold. "Signal's drifting," he muttered. Drifting where? No one asked. The slope ahead looked identical in every direction. Daniel glanced back. Their footprints stretched behind them in 4 clean lines. Straight, confident, proof they had chosen something. The wind sharpened. By 11 o'clock, the temperature had dropped noticeably. Stephen's cheeks burned red. His breathing became louder than the wind. They crouched behind a shallow snow rise for water. Ice formed at the bottle mouths. Daniel flexed his fingers. Sensation came slower now. Mark checked his watch again. "If we push another hour, we'll be near the summit ridge." Another hour. On paper, it sounded harmless. Daniel did the math in silence. Wind speed, descent time, margin. The numbers did not comfort him. They stood. The slope steepened. Each step required force. Snow grains blew sideways across their legs. The mountain had stopped pretending to be calm. At 12:32 p.m., Stephen paused again, this time longer. "You good?" Brian asked sharply. "Yeah," Stephen answered too fast. Daniel studied his face. The focus in Stephen's eyes lagged slightly. Fatigue, maybe, or something building. A sudden gust drove Mark sideways. He caught himself with his axe. Snow lifted in sheets, stinging exposed skin. Mark checked the GPS again. The arrow spun briefly before settling. "We might be drifting east." "Might?" Brian replied. Behind them, sections of their footprints were already fading. Wind-driven snow filled them unevenly. The path back was losing clarity. Daniel turned fully this time. The line of 4 tracks was no longer solid. Some parts remained deep and sharp. Others were soft depressions barely visible. The world had narrowed to 20 meters in every direction. No clear landmarks, no shadows, just moving white. Daniel stepped closer to Stephen. "We stay tight," he said quietly. "No gaps." No one argued. They moved again, closer together now. The wind howled across the ridge, no longer patient. By 12:58 p.m., snow began falling harder, sideways. Visibility dropped further. Mark tried the GPS once more. The signal hesitated. Behind them, the last fully intact stretch of 4 parallel footprints disappeared under a smooth layer of wind-packed snow. The mountain did not roar. It did not threaten. It simply erased what proved they had been there. And for the first time that day, Daniel understood something simple and heavy. If they lost each other here, there would be nothing left to show where it had happened. By 1:07 p.m., the storm stopped pretending to build. It arrived. Wind tore across the ridge in steady blasts that forced them to lean forward just to remain upright. Snow no longer fell gently. It moved sideways, hard and fast, cutting across goggles and seams. The world shrank to a moving tunnel of white. "Visibility's dropping under 10 meters, Mark shouted. Brian nodded but did not slow. Slowing meant losing heat. Losing heat meant losing more than time. Stephen's steps shortened. Daniel noticed first. The younger man's breathing turned uneven, sharp pulls that did not seem to fill his lungs. "You need a break?" Daniel asked. "I'm fine," Stephen replied, too quickly again. They moved another 50 meters before Stephen's crampon caught awkwardly on wind-packed crust. He fell hard onto his side. The sound of impact was dull, swallowed by snow and wind. Daniel was on him immediately. Stephen tried to stand. His right leg buckled. Brian knelt and pressed along the knee. Stephen flinched. "Not broken," Brian said after a moment. "But it's bad." Mark checked the GPS again, shielding the screen with his glove. The arrow trembled. "We're off the line," he said. "We drifted more east than I thought." "How far?" Daniel asked. "Hard to tell. Signal's unstable." The wind hit again, stronger. Daniel felt it push through the extra weight on his back. The slope around them offered no shelter, no rock outcrop, no ridge wall, just exposure. Stephen tried to stand again. He made it upright but leaned heavily into Daniel. "I can walk," he insisted. He could, but slower, much slower. Brian stood and looked into the white ahead. "If we keep this pace, we'll still be on the upper ridge when dark hits." Dark. In these winds, dark meant something final. Mark's voice cut through the gusts. "We split." Daniel looked at him. "No." "One pair pushes down for help. One pair moves slower," Mark continued, louder now. "If we all stay together, we all get trapped." The idea hung between them, brutal in its logic. Brian did not reject it immediately. He was calculating. Time, distance, survival odds. Stephen shifted his weight and nearly fell again. Daniel tightened his grip around the younger man's harness. "He doesn't make it alone," he said. "No one's alone," Mark shot back. 2 and 2. The wind howled again, forcing them into a crouch. Snow coated their jackets in seconds. Daniel's fingers were losing fine control. He flexed them inside his gloves. Behind them, their tracks were nearly gone. Only shallow shadows hinted where they had stepped. Mark pointed downhill into the white. "If Brian and I move fast, we can reach lower elevation in 2 hours. We call SAR. They're already on alert with this storm." "Assuming we're still where you think we are," Daniel replied. Brian finally spoke. "Staying tight sounds noble, but noble doesn't beat wind." Daniel looked at Stephen. The younger man's face had turned pale beneath the red burn of cold. His eyes blinked slowly, as if focus required effort. "You good?" Daniel asked quietly. Stephen nodded. It took him a second too long. Time stretched in the wind. Mark checked his watch again. 1:42 p.m. "If we wait longer, we lose the window completely," he said. Daniel felt the weight on his shoulders, not just the pack. He thought of Portland, of a kitchen light left on, of the quiet promise he made before leaving that he would be careful. Careful. Brian stepped closer. "2 teams. We move now." Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew the argument about unity. He knew the statistics about splitting groups. He also knew what altitude and injury did when night arrived. Stephen leaned into him again, almost involuntarily. Daniel understood something cold and simple. Staying together felt right. But feeling right was not the same as surviving. The wind surged once more, harder than before. Snow erased another section of ground behind them. Mark looked at Daniel directly. "We decide now." For several seconds, no one spoke. Only wind. Finally, Brian extended a rope coil toward Daniel. "We'll mark direction and move straight downslope," Brian said. "You hold position. Keep him warm. Don't try to move far." Daniel looked at the rope, then at Stephen. 2 hours, Mark added. "If we're not back by then, you reassess." Reassess. As if that word made it manageable. Daniel nodded once, not because he liked the plan, because he saw no alternative that did not end worse. They moved quickly then. Efficient. No ceremony. Brian and Mark adjusted gear, checked harnesses, took the primary GPS unit. Daniel removed Stephen's pack and redistributed weight again, strapping more onto himself. The wind swallowed half their final words. "Straight line," Brian shouted. 2 hours, Mark repeated. Daniel watched as the two figures stepped into the white. At first, their shapes were clear, then blurred, then reduced to dark movement against moving snow. Within seconds, they were gone. Silence did not follow, only wind. Daniel turned back to Stephen. "We're staying put," he said. Behind them, the 4 clean lines of footprints had already become 3 indistinct paths, and now there would only be 2. By 2:18 p.m., the storm erased any illusion that time still belonged to them. Daniel forced Stephen into a shallow snow hollow, carving space with his axe until they had something that resembled shelter. It was not protection, it was resistance. The wind tore over the ridge and spilled down in hard bursts, filling their collars with ice crystals that stung like sand. Stephen's knee had stiffened. When Daniel tried to straighten the leg slightly, Stephen sucked air through his teeth. "Leave it," he muttered. Daniel stopped. He stripped off one glove long enough to check circulation in Stephen's fingers. Pale, sluggish refill. Not good. He shoved chemical warmers into Stephen's gloves and under his armpits. The movement cost him feeling in his own hands. He did not comment on it. The extra weight he had taken that morning now felt deliberate, ironic. He shifted the packs behind them to block some of the wind. Snow began to pile against the improvised barrier almost immediately. 2 hours, Stephen said faintly. Daniel glanced at his watch. 2:26. Yeah. He did not say what both of them were calculating. 2 hours assumed clean descent, assumed stable footing, assumed they were not more off route than Mark had admitted. The wind howled over them again. Daniel pressed his shoulder against Stephen's to keep him upright. "Stay awake," Daniel said. Stephen tried to laugh. It came out thin and brittle. "I'm not sleeping." But his eyes drifted, not closed, just unfocused. Daniel studied the slope below. Nothing visible, no movement, no shapes returning through white. At 3:04 p.m., the snow intensified. Heavy now, horizontal. Their hollow filled faster than Daniel could clear it. He checked Stephen's speech again. "Tell me your address," Daniel said. Stephen hesitated, then answered correctly, though slowly. "Good," Daniel replied. He flexed his own fingers again. The sensation in his right hand had dulled significantly. He rubbed it against his jacket, trying to force warmth back into skin that felt distant. Minutes passed without shape or sound beyond wind. At 3:41 p.m., Stephen's head dipped forward. Daniel shook him immediately. "No, stay with me." Stephen blinked. His words began to slur at the edges. Daniel understood the shift. Not panic, not drama, just the quiet slide towards something irreversible. He looked downhill again. Nothing. His watch read 4:02. 2 hours had passed. Daniel did the calculation again, more brutally this time. If Brian and Mark had reached lower elevation by now, they would be moving fast. If they had not, then they were fighting the same white wall. Waiting felt correct. It felt loyal. It felt responsible. But loyalty did not generate heat. Stephen's breathing had slowed, each inhale shallow, uneven. Daniel, Stephen whispered. If they don't, they will. Daniel cut him off. He did not know if that was true. At 4:19 p.m., the light shifted. Not darker yet, but flatter. The kind of gray that precedes it. Daniel scanned the slope again. Still nothing. He thought of Portland, of the kitchen light, of a promise framed as caution. Careful. He examined their resources. One stove, limited fuel, one emergency bivvy. Not enough insulation for a full night at this elevation in these winds. If he stayed, they both risked freezing. If he moved, Stephen could not follow. Daniel pressed his forehead briefly against the back of his glove. No anger, no grand emotion, just the arithmetic of cold. Listen, he said quietly. Stephen's eyes opened halfway. I'm going to move lower. Not far. I'll mark direction. I'll come back up. Stephen tried to focus. Don't. Daniel tightened the strap on Stephen's hood, secured the bivvy around his shoulders, packed snow tighter along the windward side. You stay awake, Daniel said. You keep moving your fingers. Stephen nodded once. Slow. Daniel stood. The wind nearly knocked him sideways. He steadied himself with his axe and looked back down the slope. White. Endless. He turned once more to Stephen. I'm not leaving, Daniel said evenly. I'm moving. He stepped away from the hollow. Each stride required effort. Snow resisted. Wind shoved at his side. After 10 meters, he looked back. Stephen was a small shape against white, still upright, still visible. Daniel continued. After 30 meters, visibility thinned further. The slope steepened slightly. He marked direction mentally, adjusting for wind drift. He glanced back again. Stephen was barely distinguishable now. Daniel forced himself to memorize the angle, the distance, the rhythm of steps. The mountain did not respond. It did not protest. It simply reduced everything to scale. Behind him, near the shallow hollow, 2 sets of footprints led away. Ahead of him, one new line began to cut into fresh snow. Search and rescue received the first call at 6:12 p.m. 2 climbers had stumbled into lower elevation near the Palmer snowfield just before dusk, disoriented, exhausted, alive. They reported splitting from the other 2 around 1:45 p.m. near Devil's Kitchen. Heavy storm, 1 injured, 1 staying behind. The storm grounded helicopters overnight. Ground teams moved at first light. At 7:38 a.m., the first SAR unit began ascending from Timberline Lodge. Wind had dropped, but the mountain remained sharp and cold. Temperature hovered near -17 degrees Celsius. Visibility improved to several hundred meters. The slope told its story without emotion. Roughly 2,700 meters up, rescuers located the first visible track line, faint but discernible. 2 sets of footprints moving downslope, wind-scoured but continuous. Farther up, near a shallow wind-carved depression, they found another set. 2 impressions leading away, and beside them, partially filled but deeper, 2 more. 4. The team leader knelt and examined the spacing. The first 4 had moved together, close, disciplined. Then something shifted. About 60 meters below the hollow, 2 tracks continued straight downslope, stride length steady, determined. Near the hollow itself, 2 tracks remained clustered, shorter spacing, uneven depth. The rescuers located the depression at 8:56 a.m. Inside, they found Stephen Park. He was seated against packed snow, partially secured inside an emergency bivvy. Snow had drifted over his lower body. His hands were positioned near his chest. Chemical warmers lay spent in his gloves. There were no signs of struggle, no frantic marks in the snow, just stillness. A medic confirmed what the mountain had already decided. The team documented coordinates, temperature, wind speed, time. They continued downslope. Roughly 30 meters from the hollow, they found where a single line of footprints began, 1 set moving away. The spacing suggested controlled movement, no running, no erratic shifts. The steps angled slightly west, compensating for wind. About 40 meters farther, the pattern changed. Stride length shortened, impressions deepened. Another 20 meters, and the track wavered briefly before correcting. The rescuers followed in silence. At 9:41 a.m., they found Daniel Carter. He lay on his side, partially shielded by a minor slope break. His ice axe was still in his hand, his body angled as if he had paused mid-step. There were no defensive marks, no chaotic disruption of snow, just the final imprint of one boot slightly ahead of the other. The mountain had covered part of him overnight, but not enough to hide what mattered. A medic knelt. Time was recorded. The slope between Stephen and Daniel measured under 100 meters, less than a football field. The rescuers stood in the cold morning light and looked at the tracks between them. From above, 4 clean lines had once moved together. Then 2 had separated and continued down. Near the hollow, 2 had stayed. From that point, 1 line had left again, and then it had ended. No further descent tracks were found beyond Daniel's final position. Brian Holt and Mark Ellis later provided formal statements. They described deteriorating weather, limited visibility, the decision to split in order to seek help. Their tracks matched their account. The report would list wind speeds, approximate temperatures, estimated times, GPS inconsistencies, elevation data. It would not list hesitation or the arithmetic of loyalty. It would not measure the distance between staying and leaving. By late afternoon, both bodies were transported down. The slope remained smooth where the hollow had been. Fresh wind began filling impressions almost immediately after the teams departed. Within hours, the 4 distinct lines were gone. No monument marked the separation point. No visible sign remained that decisions had been made there. Only coordinates entered into a database. Only a date. February 17th, 2012. On Mount Hood, 4 sets of footprints had once moved across a ridge. By morning, there had been 3, then 2, then 1, and finally, none. Mount Hood did not shout. It did not chase them. It simply waited. 4 men walked into the storm that morning. By the next day, only their footprints told the story. Sometimes the hardest choice feels logical. Sometimes it feels necessary. And sometimes it costs more than anyone expected. If this story meant something to you, remember one thing. The mountain does not forgive confidence. This was the final climb.